It's Monday, it's the 30th of June. I'm Moon Gun-young. This is ARIRANG News live from Seoul. Our top stories today. A committee in Korea's parliament passes a resolution condemning Japan's review of its 1993 apology for forced sexual enslavement of women during World War II. Following two failed prime minister nominations, President Park Geun-hye vows to improve personnel management by keeping a pool of talented candidates at all times. And a hike in cigarette prices may be imminent in this country. After a decade of having the cheapest cigarette price among the OECD, the government is turning to its last resort to convince smokers to kick the habit. We'll have those stories and more, but first in Seoul's National Assembly. The Parliamentary Foreign Affairs Committee has passed a resolution condemning Japan's recent review of its past apology for coercing women into sexual slavery during World War II. Now, calling Tokyo's review of the 1993 Kono statement a historical provocation, Korean lawmakers accused Japan of contradicting itself by denying the essence of its past apology and denounced it for damaging a peaceful coexistence and cooperation in Northeast Asia. Warning such a provocative act would isolate Japan from the international community, the resolution urges Tokyo to stop claiming the apology was a compromise made between Korea and Japan. Now, the lawmakers also called on Seoul to search for additional evidence of the Japanese military's forced wartime prostitution or wartime sexual enslavement of women from Korea and other Asian countries. Chinese President Xi Jinping has vowed that no violations of territorial integrity will be tolerated and says no nation should be allowed to monopolize global affairs. Watchers say his comments can be seen as a thinly veiled attack on the U.S. Kim Min-ji reports.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has stressed that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a nation should be respected. His comments came during an event marking the 60th anniversary of a mutual peace agreement between China, Myanmar, and India. The 1954 agreement called for mutually respecting sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as mutual non-aggression and non-interference in domestic affairs.
Sovereignty and territorial integrity should not be infringed upon. This is a basic principle that should not be ignored.
The comments come as China is locked in territorial disputes with neighboring countries such as Japan, the Philippines, and Vietnam. In a national meeting late last week, the leader said China should not forget its humiliating past as a victim of foreign aggression and called for stronger border defense. It was seen to target Tokyo in particular, which has been at odds with Beijing over territorial as well as historical disputes. He also stressed that China will not seek hegemony, no matter how strong it becomes.
China does not acknowledge the notion that a country will seek hegemony when it grows in strength. Hegemony or militarism is not the genes of China.
The Chinese leader also said the right of a country to choose its own social system and path of development should be respected. That remark was seemingly his way of telling the West to keep out of China's domestic affairs. The Chinese president, however, did not mention North Korea's nuclear weapons or the Korean peninsula during his speech. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Well, President Park Geun-hye, who last week pledged to name a new presidential secretary to oversee personnel management, says her office will maintain a pool of talented candidates at all times and keep track of their verification records. At the first meeting of her senior secretary since retaining her prime minister, following two nomination failures, President Park also asked the political parties to seek ways to improve the confirmation hearing process. Now, as for a recent shooting spree at a general outpost near the inter-Korean border, the president said she was sorry that the incident happened, then asked the military to determine what caused the incident, who should take responsibility, and to come up with preventive measures. The Korean president is facing the most serious test of her leadership thus far, with her approval rating plunging after her administration's poor handling of the Ferry disaster in April and her failure to find a suitable prime minister. Well, this has many wondering whether she has enough time to push through with her envisioned reform drive and help the ruling party improve its chances in some critical by-elections at the end of July. Our Ji Myung-gil reports.
President Park is racing against time to win back support from voters before a by-election on July 30th, with many political pundits saying her party has a good chance of losing its majority in parliament. An outcome like that would cripple her efforts to push through legislation aimed at spurring economic recovery, overhauling government systems, and stamping out social ills accumulated during a rapid, headlong drive toward industrialization over the past several decades. President Park's plan was to give a fresh impetus to her reform drive by shaking up her cabinet, but she ran into problems after her two prime minister nominees resigned one after another in the face of public criticism over morality and controversial remarks on history. The president's approval rating stood near 60% in March, but as of the end of June, the number is hovering around 48%, the lowest since she took office in 2013. The Park administration has been making reforms, but has made little progress. Since the Seoul Ferry disaster, President Park has tried to overhaul the government's safety management system by dismantling the Korea Coast Guard and setting up a new safety management bureau directly under the Prime Minister's office. As part of efforts to end the cozy ties between the public and private sector, she also tried to keep retired government officials from landing jobs in companies, which has contributed to sloppy safety checks. Critics have also advised President Park to communicate more with the ruling Saenuri Party and the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy. But with confirmation hearings for new cabinet members taking place at the National Assembly through next week and July's by-elections just around the corner, the president may have to come up with new tactics to regain the people's trust. Ji Myung-gil, ARIRANG News.
A formal investigation into the Seoul Ferry disaster is currently underway at the National Assembly. Now, the parliamentary committee overseeing the probe began a special session at 10 earlier this morning, that's roughly 4 hours ago, and is questioning various ministries on whether they have done enough in dealing with the ferry accident. The ministries, including the Security Ministry and the Defense Ministry, have turned in their reports on how they've responded to the deadly disaster. The probe is set to continue until Wednesday. North Korea is reportedly preparing to put 2 Americans on trial for carrying out what it says were hostile acts against the regime. Pyongyang's official Korean Central News Agency said in a short report today that investigation into Americans Matthew Todd Miller and Jeffrey Edward Fowle showed that suspicions about their crimes, although unspecified, have been confirmed by evidence and their testimony. Now, Miller and Fowle entered the North on separate tours in April. There are 3 U.S. citizens known to be detained in the North currently, including Kenneth Bae, a Korean American who has been held in the communist state for more than a year now.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Moon Gon-young live from Seoul.
Mobile shopping market for the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and Japanese name Sea of Japan in school textbooks in the state of Virginia. Few manufacturers here in Korea seem confident after the April ferry disaster dented already sluggish consumer spending. The Bank of Korea says the business sentiment index for June remained subdued, coming in at 77, which is down from the 79 tallied a month ago. That marks the 2nd straight month of decline since the ferry's sinking. A reading below the benchmark 100 means pessimists outnumber optimists. The central bank says sluggish domestic demand, a strong local currency, and a slowdown in emerging economies led the drop. However, things look quite different for Korea's job market. It seems to be faring quite well. Well, job creation is expected to top 500,000 this year, marking the highest gain in 12 years. The Korea Development Institute says the nation will likely add between 400,000 to 480,000 new jobs in the second half of this year. Now, although the figure is a sharp decline from a year-on-year job growth of over 600,000 in the first half of this year, the job growth for the entire year is forecast to exceed the government's target of 450,000. It is expected to be the largest jump since 2002, when just under 600,000 new jobs were created. You know, smokers have it good here in Korea. Cigarette prices are lowest among OECD countries, and while there has been talk of raising tobacco prices for quite some time now, they have remained the same for 10 years. Now, but it seems like enough is enough, as related ministries are making much more active efforts to make sure a price hike is pushed through. Our Kwon So-hwa reports.
Just last week, Korea's Ministry of Health and Welfare released a shocking anti-smoking advertisement in the hope it would convince smokers to kick their habit. At a recent symposium held on World No Tobacco Day, the ministry said it will actively push ahead with the World Health Organization's recommendation to raise cigarette prices to bring down the country's high smoking rate. In Korea, you pay 2,500 won, or roughly $2.50 for a pack of 20 cigarettes. That's the cheapest out of the 41 OECD nations. A pack of cigarettes is more than 6 times more expensive in Norway than it is in Korea. Medical experts say the relation between the price of tobacco and quitting cannot be ignored. In fact, 10 years ago, when the price of cigarettes went up by around 50 cents, the smoking rate among men in Korea dropped from 58% in 2004 to 44% just 2 years later. But there's a reason why the government has failed on a number of occasions to push through with a raise. There are concerns people in the low-income bracket will be hit hardest, since a cigarette price hike also means a tax hike. The tax paid on tobacco products is the same for high or low-income people. Tobacco tax is also paid indirectly, meaning the tax is not collected by the government, but by tobacco companies. But as Finance Minister nominee Choi Kyung-hwan has said, although there is a perception welfare is placing a higher tax burden on the people, cigarette prices must be raised for the sake of public health. Last year, Korea's smoking rate was the second highest among OECD members, barely trailing Greece. Kwon So-hwa, ARIRANG News.
And let's continue on with our 2014 Brazil World Cup action. Well, starting off with an exciting match which took place earlier today, the Netherlands taking on Mexico. Let's take a look at the highlights. Now, it started rather slow with both sides scoreless after the first half, but Giovanni Dos Santos scores the first goal of the match, giving Mexico the 1-0 lead. Mexico had it in the bag, but Wesley Sneijder in the 88th minute finds the back of the net for the equalizer. The match looked like it was going into extra time, but a penalty is called in the dying seconds of the match as Huntelaar scores the game winner, helping the Netherlands advance to the quarterfinals with a 2-1 win. Meanwhile, with Greece taking on Costa Rica, a scoreless first half, but Brian Ruiz in the 52nd minute gives Costa Rica the 1-0 lead. Now both sides looking quite defensive the rest of the way, but another last-minute equalizer by Socrates Papastofoulis. Okay, that's a mouthful. And as the match goes into a penalty shootout, Costa Rica goes perfect on the spot kick, beating the Greek side 5-3 to advance to the next round. Meanwhile, Korea's national football team returned home earlier this morning after their World Cup in Brazil. And their return was welcomed with a mixed response, as an unruly person threw a taffy at the players, while others shouted that it's okay. Midfielder Son Heung-min stated that they were unprepared for the World Cup, while Koo Ja-chul, the captain of the team, was more optimistic, stating that it was an experience to be learned from. Meanwhile, manager Hong Myung-bo added that he will decide on his future shortly, as many speculate that he will resign as the head coach. well, after a slower than usual start to the summer season, the box office finally caught fire over the weekend as one of the year's biggest films burst into theaters. Transformers: Age of Extinction, the fourth installment in the hugely popular Hollywood franchise, seemed so dominant that no major films were released leading up to its debut, and few dare to go up against it until at least mid-July. But even in the blockbuster season, there are some alternatives for film fans that are not in the mood for high-octane cinema, and plenty of other films will be hitting theaters, albeit on fewer screens, at the Bucheon Fantastic International Film Festival, which takes place in July, announced its program last week. Well, here to talk about it all is our film critic, Piers Conran. So Piers, Transformers seems to have gotten off to a good start. How big do you think it'll be?
Well, there was no question that the new Transformers was going to be one of the biggest films of the year here in Korea as well as all around the world. The last one actually holds the distinction of the opening weekend record, which is to say the most viewers in the kind of Friday to Sunday frame. That was 2.3 million, and this film didn't quite reach that mark. It hit 1.85. That's still enormous, one of the biggest weekends we've seen. And the film has been incredibly successful in America, $100 million weekend there, but more surprising is its debut in China, where it made $19 million in its first weekend.
Wow.
Which is by far the biggest opening of any film in China. And so it just shows the kind of the potential of that market. But also, of course, it makes sense because a lot of the film was shot in China, and it starts some famous Chinese actors, and so that was very much part of the plans that really paid off for them.
So what is different in this latest robot extravaganza?
Truth be told, not a whole lot. It's a very loud, brash film full of kind of thin characterizations and a really kind of wonky plot. Lots of very big explosions, you know, ludicrous set pieces, and you can kind of hear from my tone how I feel about the film.
Yes.
But it's more of the same, and but to be honest, the film has been very successful. So I can't judge it for that. People are going back to it, and again, we'll see these strong returns because it's what people want.
Right, and it was filmed in China and Hong Kong, right?
That's correct, yeah. So we've got part of it's in Beijing, and the big finale takes place in Hong Kong. And you know, there are a few differences in the film, and that's one I really I did kind of like because Hong Kong is just this eminently cinematic town, and so you know, shooting there was I felt was kind of an inspired choice. Although there was a big business decision in there as well that worked out. And a few other changes would include, you know, they're kind of putting this as the start of a new franchise. The first three films starred Shia LaBeouf, and you know, those are kind of maligned in their own way. And then Mark Wahlberg is now the lead in this new one here, and he's kind of got a bigger fan base and more of kind of a family man image at this point. So that was I wouldn't say it's one of his best roles, but it's certainly I'd say a small step up from Shia LaBeouf.
So I don't know if I should even ask this question, but I'm getting the strong feeling that you're not the biggest fan of this film.
No, I'm not a big fan of this film, nor am I a fan of this franchise. Typically, these films I think they're too long, they have very bad plots, they're just very poorly written with these kind of characters that personally I can't relate to whatsoever, and I don't care what happens to them on screen. I'd be quite happy to see a few of them get stomped on by the robots. So, you know, Michael Bay's films typically don't do very well with critics. I will admit I have a very big guilty pleasure. I love Armageddon, but besides that, I'm not a big fan of his films.
Well, you know, so besides this big Hollywood movie, what else is available for our viewers who have a similar sentiment to yours?
Well, outside of the Transformers, the other two big films that have been playing for a long time, and we discussed on the last show, are Edge of Tomorrow and A Hard Day. And you know, those are good films, and but they've been playing for a while. There were only some small releases this week, and those include Locke, which is a new thriller starring Tom Hardy. I haven't seen it myself, but it was very well received when it opened at Venice last year, and it also played at Jeonju earlier this year. Speaking of Jeonju, one of my favorite Korean films of the year to date premiered there and just opened, and that's called Futureless Things. It's really kind of a colorful and fun Korean indie that almost scratches up to the commercial level. It's really, really fun. And so that's kind of it at the moment in theaters.
So anybody that we know or we're familiar with starring in that film, or the director, are we familiar with him?
The director is called Kim Hyung-mok, and or Kim Kyung-mok, sorry, and he's not very well known. He has the distinction of perhaps being a filmmaker that's a Korean filmmaker who made a film at the youngest age. He made his feature debut at the age of 23. And I think he's only maybe 30 now, and he's made like 5 or 6 films. And he's very much an indie player. He won his previous feature, which was called Stateless Things, was at Venice, so that was a big deal. But he's not very well known at the public at large, and the same goes for most of the cast.
Well, perhaps this could be his big break.
I certainly hope so.
Right, into the big scene. So do you think anything will be up against Transformers in the coming weeks?
Well, I mean, it's going to have a huge advantage. After such a big weekend, I think it'll maintain the edge. It seems like there's some kind of franchise fatigue has set in. People are maybe sick of seeing the same thing over and over again, but it's still doing really well. Next week we have The Divine Move of Jung Woo-sung, which is a very colorful, stylish thriller. Jung Woo-sung's films always do very well, so this could kind of, I don't think it'll come first in this coming week, but it will certainly put up a challenge. And then the only film that could really kind of steal away the crown will be a week after that, and that's the Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, which is kind of the sequel of the reboot. It's getting so complicated these days, but that was Rise of the Planet of the Apes 3 years ago, which did quite well. This one, reviews have just started trickling in over the weekend. They are exceptionally strong. So I expect the film to do very, very well.
Right, and we have The Neighbors coming in Korea
yes, I did.
as well.
Of course, Neighbors is, now that film has done very, very well in America.
Right.
And so the kind of the combination of Seth Rogen and Zac Efron, that was doing, it kind of got different demographics in the States. But as a comedy, the problem is it doesn't translate very well. So comedies traditionally don't do very well in foreign language territories, with a few exceptions, but I don't think this is going to be one of them. So I don't think it'll put up a big fight against Transformers.
So as for, I want to go back to The Divine Move. You know, Jung Woo-sung is a very big namer here in Korea and perhaps in the Asian film community. How does he do? What's his acting like in this movie?
Jung Woo-sung is a big star, and he's always a watchable presence on screen. And of course, he's been popular since the 90s films he made, like Beat or City of the Rising Sun. And here, he's playing off his persona, so he doesn't have to talk all that much. It's just kind of to look cool, take off his shirt a few times, do his usual thing. And as much as I do like him, he's not as charismatic as some other people in the cast, which is why they made the wise choice of having kind of a fairly broad cast around him. Some very strong actors, like of course the veteran star An Sung-ki, a legend of the Korean cinema scene, and then people like Kim In-kwon, who I'm a big fan of, and so it works with him part of an ensemble, although still the lead of it. But not too much weight is put on his shoulders, which I think is probably a wise decision.
So besides these blockbusters, is there anything else that film fans could look forward to?
Well, one of my favorite events of the year, in fact, my favorite film event of the year is next month, and that is the Pucheon International Fantastic Film Festival, or PFAN for short. And so that is, these fantastic film festivals it's a name we use for genre film festivals, and this is the biggest one in Asia. And I'm a huge fan. It's going into its 18th edition this year. And so what you'll see is a lot of genre films there. You'll see kind of fantasy films and thrillers and crime films and horror films. And it's a really fun event. They always program great films from all around the world. They have lots of different sideshow events, like an open air stuff. It's cosplay events and lots of things going on, and it's a really fun and friendly atmosphere. And every year I go for the whole 10 days, and I have a blast.
Well, we'd love to find out what they have in store for us, and perhaps we could pick it up right here in our next edition, which will be this Friday, and to see what, make some predictions as to what will be featured here, and, what will make it big, who will make it big, and who will make an appearance there and whatnot. All right, thanks, Pierce, as always, for a glimpse into this week's exciting cinema scene.
Thanks for having me again.
Good afternoon. We begin our Monday with a hot and cloudy day, and we are also expecting some sudden showers all across the nation, including here in Seoul, with thunderstorms and hail for some regions. And also starting today, monsoon rain is in the forecast over in Chungcheong province. And with the rain in the forecast, it will be humid with high temperatures, generally 3 degrees higher than yesterday, putting up the highs in 30s for some regions. And going over to our temperature readings, Seoul will top over to 31 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will peak up to 30 and 27 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops over to 27, Dokdo at 25, while Mount Kumgang tops over to 26. And as for the weather conditions at the World Cup in Brazil, thankfully there is no rain in the forecast for there and rather cool temperatures compared to previous days. Now that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you, Kanyang.
All right, well, thank you, Michelle, for that. And that's just about all from me at this hour. I'm Moon Gon-young. Check back with us at 4 p.m. Korea time for Business Today.